This is the third part of our lecture on first humans, and this part of the series is going to be about migratory patterns of early humans as well as the culture and social structure of first peoples. Sometime after about 1,000 years ago, human beings began their long trek out of Africa and into Eurasia, Australia, the Americas, and much later the islands of the Pacific. In occupying the planet, members of our species accomplished the most remarkable feat of learning to live in virtually every environmental niche on Earth, something that no other large animal had done, and they did it with only stone tools and a gathering and hunting technology to aid them.
Much of this long journey occurred during the difficult climatic conditions of the last ice age, at its peak around 20,000 years ago, when thick ice sheets covered much of northern Eurasia and North America. The ice age did give these outward-bound human beings one advantage, however. The amount of water frozen in northern glaciers lowered sea levels around the planet, creating land bridges among various regions that were separated after the glaciers melted. Britain was then joined to Europe, eastern Siberia was connected to Alaska, and New Guinea, Australia, and Tasmania were all part of a huge supercontinent known as Sahul. Human migration out of Africa first led to the Middle East and from there westward into Europe about 40,000 years ago, and eastward into Asia. Among the most carefully researched areas of early human settlement in Eurasia are those in southern France and northern Spain. Colder Ice Age climates around 20,000 years ago apparently pushed more northerly European peoples southward into warmer regions. There they altered their hunting habits, focusing on reindeer and horses, and developed new technologies such as spear throwers and perhaps the bow and arrow, as well as many different kinds of stone tools. Most remarkably, they also left a record of their world in hundreds of cave paintings depicting reindeer, bulls, horses, and other animals, brilliantly portrayed in colors of red, yellow, brown, and black. Images of early human beings, impressions of human hands, and various abstract designs, perhaps an early form of writing, often accompanied the cave paintings. Scholars have debated endlessly what insights these remarkable images might provide into the mental world of Paleolithic Europeans. Were they examples of totemic thinking, the belief that particular groups of people were associated with or descended from particular animals? Did they represent a form of hunting magic intended to enhance the success of these early hunters? Because many of the paintings were located deep within caves, were they perhaps part of religious or ritual practices or rites of passage? Were they designed to pass on information to future generations? Or did they symbolize, as some recent scholars contend, a coded representation of a Paleolithic worldview divided into male and female realms, both opposed to and balancing one another? We simply do not know. Nonetheless, these images excite our imagination still, 20,000 years or more after they were created. In them, we sense a kinship with the humanity of our distant ancestors. Farther east, archaeologists have uncovered still other remarkable Paleolithic adaptations to Ice Age conditions. Across the vast plains of Central Europe, Ukraine, and Russia, new technologies emerged, including bone needles, multi-layered clothing, weaving nets, storage pits, baskets, and pottery. Partially underground dwellings constructed from the bones and tusks of mammoths compensated for the absence of caves and rock shelters. All of this suggests that some of these people settled down in more permanent settlements, at least temporarily abandoning their nomadic journeys. Associated with these Eastern European peoples were numerous female figurines. Carved from stone, antlers, mammoth tusks, or occasionally baked clay, these so-called Venus or Great Goddess figurines depict the female form, often with exaggerated breasts, buttocks, hips, and stomachs. They were not limited to a single region, but have been found all across Europe, from Spain to Russia, suggesting a network of human communication and cultural diffusion over a wide area. Early human migration to Australia, currently dated to around 60,000 years ago, came from Indonesia and involved another first in human affairs, the use of boats. Over time, people settled in most regions of this huge continent, though quite sparsely. Scholars estimate the population of Australia at about 300,000 people in 1788 when the first Europeans arrived. Over tens of thousands of years, these people have developed perhaps 250 languages, collected a wide variety of bulbs, tubers, roots, seeds, and cereal grasses, and hunted large and small animals as well as birds, fish, and other marine life. A relatively simple technology appropriate to a gathering and hunting economy sustained Australia's Aboriginal people into modern times. When outsiders arrived in the late 18th century, all of the continent's people still practiced that ancient way of life, despite the presence of agriculture in nearby New Guinea. Accompanying their technological simplicity and traditionalism was the development of an elaborate and complex outlook on the world, known as Dreamtime. Expressed in endless stories, in extended ceremonies, and in the evocative rock art of the continent's peoples, the dream time recounted the beginning of things, how ancestral beings crisscrossed the land, creating its rivers, hills, rocks, and waterholes, how various people came to inhabit the land, and how they relate to animals and to one another. In this view of the world, everything in the natural order was a vibration, an echo, a footprint of these ancient happenings which link the current inhabitants intimately to particular places and to timeless events in the past. The journeys of the Dreamtime's ancestral beings reflect in a general way the network of migration, communication, and exchange that linked the continent's many Paleolithic people. Far from isolated groups, they had long exchanged particular stones, pigments, materials for ropes and baskets, wood for spears, feathers and shells for ornaments, and an addictive psychoactive drug known as pituri over distances of hundreds of miles. Songs, dances, stories, and rituals likewise circulated. Precisely how far back in time these networks extend is difficult to pinpoint, but it seems clear that Paleolithic Australia, like ancient Europe, was both many separate worlds and at the same time one loosely connected world. The earliest settlement of the Western Hemisphere occurred much later than that of Australia, for it took some time for human beings to penetrate the frigid lands of eastern Siberia, which was the jumping-off point for the move into the Americas. Experts continue to argue about precisely when the first migrations occurred, somewhere between 30,000 and 15,000 years ago. About the route of migration, by land across the Bering Strait or by sea down the west coast of North America, about how many separate migrations took place, and about how long it took for people to penetrate the tip of South America. There is, however, good evidence of human activity in southern Chile by 12,500 years ago. The first clearly defined and widespread cultural tradition in the Americas is associated with people who made a distinctive projectile point, known to archaeologists as a Clovis point. Scattered all over North America, the Clovis culture flourished around 12,000 to 11,000 years ago. Scattered bands of Clovis people ranged over huge areas, camping along rivers, springs, and water holes where large animals congregated. Although they certainly hunted smaller animals and gathered many wild plants, Clovis people show up in the archaeological record most dramatically as hunters of very large mammals, such as mammoths and bison. Killing a single mammoth could provide food for many weeks, or in cold weather for much of the winter. The wide distribution of Clovis point technology suggests yet again a regional pattern of cultural diffusion and at least indirect communication over a large area. Then, about 10,900 years ago, all traces of the Clovis people disappear from the archaeological record, at the same time that many species of large animals, including the mammoth and several species of horses and camels, also became extinct. Did the Clovis people hunt these animals to extinction and then vanish themselves as their source of food disappeared? Or did the drier climate that came with the end of the Ice Age cause this megafaunal extinction? Experts disagree, but what happened next was the creation of a much greater diversity of cultures as people adapted to this new situation in various ways. Hunters on the Great Plains continued to pursue bison, which largely avoided the fate of the mammoths. Others learned to live in the desert, taking advantage of seasonal plants and smaller animals, while those who lived near the sea, lakes, or streams drew on indigenous fish and birds. Many people retain their gathering and hunting ways of life into modern times, while others became farmers, and in a few favored regions later developed cities and large-scale states. The last phase of the great human migration to the ends of the earth took place in the Pacific Ocean and was distinctive in many ways. In the first place, it occurred quite recently, jumping off only about 3,500 years ago from the Bismarck and Solomon Islands near New Guinea, as well as from the islands of the Philippines. It was everywhere a waterborne migration, making use of ocean-going canoes and remarkable navigational skills, and it happened very quickly and over a huge area of the planet. Speaking Austronesian languages that traced back to southern China, these oceanic voyagers had settled every habitable piece of land in the Pacific Basin within about 2,500 years. Other Austronesians had sailed west from Indonesia across the Indian Ocean to settle the island of Madagascar off the coast of eastern Africa. This extraordinary process of expansion, both rapid and extensive, made the Austronesian family of languages the most widespread in the world. With the occupation of New Zealand around 1200 CE, the initial human settlement of the planet was finally complete. In contrast with all of the other migrations, these Pacific voyages were undertaken by people with an agricultural technology who carried both domesticated plants and animals in their canoes. Both men and women made these journeys, suggesting a deliberate intention to colonize new lands. Virtually everywhere they went, two developments followed. One was the creation of highly stratified societies or chiefdoms, of which ancient Hawaiian society is a prime example. In Hawaii, an elite class of chiefs with political and military power ruled over a mass of commoners. The other development was the dramatic impact that these migrations had on the environment of previously uninhabited islands. Many species of animals quickly became extinct, especially large flightless birds. The picture below of the giant statues is that of Rapa Nui, or Easter Island. You may have heard of it before, as the History Channel often has programs theorizing that aliens came and built these giant bodies before departing the planet. What we do know is that the destruction of the forests of Easter Island between the 15th and 17th centuries of the Common Era brought famine, violent conflict, and sharp population decline to the small island society. Once they cut down all of the trees on the island, nobody could leave, for they could no longer build the canoes that had brought them there. During the long journeys across the earth, Paleolithic people created a multitude of separate and distinct societies, each with its own history, culture, language, identity, stories, and rituals. But the limitations of a gathering and hunting technology using stone tools imposed some commonalities on these ancient people. Based on the archaeological record and on the example of gathering and hunting societies that still existed in modern times, scholars have sketched out some of the common features of these early societies. Above all else, these Paleolithic societies were small, consisting of bands of 25 to 50 people, in which all relationships were intensely personal and thought of normally in terms of kinship. No anonymity or hiding in the crowd was possible in a society of relatives. The available technology permitted only a very low population density and ensured an extremely slow rate of population growth. These Paleolithic bands were seasonally mobile or nomadic, moving frequently and in regular patterns to exploit the resources of wild plants and animals on which they depended. The low productivity of a gathering and hunting economy normally did not allow the production of much surplus, and because they were on the move so often, transporting and accumulation of goods was out of the question. All of this meant highly egalitarian societies lacking the many inequalities of wealth and power that came with larger agricultural and urban life. With no formal chiefs, kings, bureaucrats, soldiers, nobles, or priests, in short, with no social hierarchy at all, these people were perhaps freer of tyranny and oppression than any subsequent kind of human society, even if they were more constrained by the forces of nature. When the British navigator and explorer Captain James Cook first encountered the gathering and hunting people of Australia in 1770, he described them a little enviously in this way: "They live in a tranquillity which is not disturbed by the inequality of the conditions. The earth and sea, of their own accord, furnishes them with all the things necessary for life. They covet not magnificent houses, household stuff. In short, they seem to set no value upon any things we gave them. They think themselves provided with all the necessaries of life. The Europeans who settled permanently among such people some 20 years later, however, found a society in which physical competition among men was expressed in frequent one-to-one combat, and in formalized but bloody battles. It also meant recurrent, public, and quite brutal beating of wives by their husbands. Although sometimes romanticized by Europeans, the relative social equality of Paleolithic people did not always generate a utopia of social harmony. Despite this, without job specialization, most people possess the same set of skills, although male and female tasks often differed based upon the gender division of labor. Relationships between women and men usually were far more equal than in later societies. As the primary food gatherers, women provided the bulk of the family income, so to speak. One study of a modern gathering and hunting society in southern Africa found that plants, normally gathered by women, provided 70% of the diet, while meat hunted by men accounted for only 30%. Like all human cultures, Paleolithic societies had rules and structures. A gender-based division of labor usually cast men as hunters and women as gatherers. Values emphasizing reciprocal sharing of goods resulted in clearly defined rules about distributing the meat from an animal kill. Rules about incest and adultery governed sexual behavior, while understandings about who could hunt or gather in particular territories regulated economic activity. Leaders arose as needed to organize a task such as a hunt, but without conferring permanent power on individuals. For a long time, gathering and hunting people were viewed as primitive, impoverished, barely eking out a living from the land. In more recent decades, anthropologists studying contemporary Paleolithic societies, those that survived into the 20th century, began to paint a different picture. They noted that gathering and hunting people frequently worked fewer hours to meet their material needs than did people in agricultural or industrial societies, and so they had more leisure time. One scholar referred to them as the original affluent society, not because they had so much, but because they wanted or needed so little. Nonetheless, life expectancy was low, probably little more than 35 years on average. Life in the wild was surely dangerous, and dependency on vagaries of nature rendered it insecure as well. Paleolithic people were not always at the mercy of nature. At times they acted to alter the natural environment substantially. The use of deliberately set fires to encourage the growth of particular plants certainly changed the landscape. In Australia, it led to the proliferation of fire-resistant eucalyptus trees at the expense of other plant species. In many parts of the world, Australia, North America, Siberia, Madagascar, and the Pacific Islands, the extinction of various large animals followed fairly quickly after the arrival of human beings, leading scholars to suggest that Paleolithic humankind played a major role, coupled perhaps with changing climates, in the disappearance of these animals. Other hominid or human-like species, such as the Neanderthals in Europe or the recently discovered Flores man in Indonesia, also perished after living side by side with Homo sapiens for millennia. Whether their disappearance occurred through massacre, interbreeding, or peaceful competition, they were among the casualties of the rise of humankind. Thus, the biological environment inhabited by gathering and hunting people was not wholly natural, but was shaped in part by their own hands. The religion or spiritual dimension of Paleolithic culture has been very hard to pin down, because bones and stones tell us little about what people thought. Art is subject to many interpretations, and the experience of contemporary gathering and hunting people may not reflect the more distant past. There is, however, clear evidence for a rich ceremonial life. The presence of rock art deep inside caves and far from living spaces suggests a ceremonial space separate from ordinary living. The extended rituals of contemporary Australian Aboriginal people, which sometimes last for weeks, confirm this impression, as do numerous and elaborate burial sites found throughout the world. No full-time religious specialists or priests led these ceremonies, but part-time shamans, people believed to be especially skilled at dealing with the spirit world, emerged as the need arose. Such people often entered an altered state of consciousness or a trance while performing the ceremonies, often with the aid of psychoactive drugs. Precisely how these people understood the non-material world is hard to reconstruct, and speculation abounds. Evidence from ancient Africa suggests a variety of understandings. Some Paleolithic societies were apparently monotheistic. Others saw several levels of supernatural beings, including a creator deity, various territorial spirits, and the spirits of dead ancestors. Still others believed in an impersonal force suffused throughout the natural order that could be accessed by shamans during a trance dance. The prevalence of Venus figurines and other symbols all across Europe has convinced some scholars, but not all, that Paleolithic religious thought had a very strongly feminine dimension, embodied in a great goddess or Venus, and concerned with the regeneration and renewal of life. It seems likely that many gathering and hunting people developed a cyclical view of time that drew on the changing phases of the moon and on the cycles of female fertility, birth, menstruation, pregnancy, new birth, and death. Such understandings of the cosmos, which saw endlessly repeated patterns of regeneration and disintegration, were very different than later Western views, which saw time moving in a straight line towards some predetermined goal.
In tracing the story of the first humans, we have examined the deep evolutionary roots that connect us to earlier hominins like Homo habilis and Homo erectus, and ultimately to Homo sapiens sapiens. These early ancestors laid the biological and cultural foundations for everything that would follow: tool use, language, social organization, and symbolic thought. We've also followed the remarkable migration of modern humans out of Africa, a journey that not only reshaped the planet's population, but also led to a stunning diversity of adaptations, beliefs, and traditions. Far from being a static or linear process, human evolution and migration reveal a dynamic and complex picture of resilience, innovation, and adaptability. Early humans were not just passive participants in their environment. They actively shaped their worlds through social cooperation, spiritual expression, and cultural creation. As we continue our study of ancient societies, this evolutionary and migratory context will help us to understand the deep roots of human behavior and the shared history that unites us across time and space.